The identical song tour continues in different cities, even though the guys are in their 80s. Due to contractual obligations, they are unable to perform within 30 days of one another. One can earn $2 million in a single night. Another one earns a $75,000 per year. Since 1972, they have remained silent despite having produced some of the finest rock music of all time. On one day, Stu Cook was close buddies with John Fogerty. After that, there was the sabotaged album, The Lawsuit, and the band's demise due to the final album. Everything shifted after what transpired behind the scenes in Denver, and there will be no forgiveness between them. Here we see how a family's happiness led to their downfall. John Fogerty came into this world in Berkeley, California on May 28, 1945. As the third of 5 brothers, he felt constantly cramped and unsettled in their overcrowded home. Galen, his dad, was a liner-type operator who worked long hours for $75 a week. Even less time was spent teaching second grade by his mother Edith. The actual issue, though, wasn't money. I blame the booze. Every time I went to the kitchen, I would find a bottle of 4 Roses stashed away. Conflicts erupted often. Again, John's parents split up after another terrible drinking incident. When he was around 8 or 9 years old, John would visit his dad in an uncomfortable manner on weekends after he moved into a rundown apartment in Oakland. Aside from increased bewilderment and quiet, there wasn't much of a break. At one point, while John was playing in a little league game, his dad blacked out, causing him to miss John's sole home run. For years, that one moment lingered with him. It was a component of what eventually became Fortunate Son. Things didn't improve at the Mellon School either. It was like a jail under the nuns' rule. You can find yourself knelt on the floor for almost an hour if you speak up in class. But the restroom regulation was the worst. Just 2 little breaks each day. The bladder of John was anxious. At least 3 times a week, he has to go potty. As they made fun of him, the other children teased him. Up until the last bell, he did nothing but sit in his wet pants. When he messed up on a spelling test, Sister Mary Margaret once made him wear a dunce cap. In the span of a year, he lost 12 pounds. There was never a word from his mother to the school. His management style at band practices later in life revealed the repressed trauma he had carried around. Exacting control down to the minute, 6-hour sessions without restroom breaks. A change occurred when he transferred to Harding Grammar and subsequently to El Cerdo High. While working at the business, he met Stu Cook and Doug Clifford in English class. Barry Olivier, a folk musician, began teaching the 3 of them guitar every Thursday. Lessons were held above a hardware store and were $3 each. The instructors were very direct with their comments. After charging John twice as much, Barry came right out and said that John lacked rhythm and natural talent. In any case, John persisted in returning. His summers were spent at Pewter Creek, close to wintertime. He had spent hours wading in the murky water. He once reeled in a 14-inch catfish and nursed it to death in a pail. His feelings of melancholy in Green River were influenced by that picture. With a population of slightly more than 25,000 in 1960, El Cerrito was home to many rock and roll aficionados like John. He shopped for 45s at Music City Records with his weekly stipend of $150 for $89. The first one was Long Tall Sally. He begged his mom for months, and finally, she gave in and let him pay $100 a month for a silver tone guitar and a little amp. Instead of helping, his dad said it was pointless. John then would spend 4 or 6 hours each day in their chilly garage practicing alone. When his fingers bled, he stopped playing. One year, 17 times, neighbors contacted the authorities. It was at 2 in the morning that he continued, and while she was fixing it, his mom broke his amplifier, all the while sobbing. Tom, John's older brother, invited him to join the Blue Velvets, his band that was already performing at local dances. Tom made derogatory remarks about Jay's stage presence into the microphone during a Memorial Day event. After almost an hour, John bolted from the stage and hid in the restroom. For a long time, he was terrified of performing. The animosity intensified at a rapid pace. To get pot in 1962, Tom put 25 in the pawn shop and took John's guitar. He kept it all for himself. For 6 months, John had no choice but to use Tom's spare. A lingering sense of betrayal plagued him. Beyond the emotional turmoil, the divorce was a major life event. Everyday existence was marked by its wounds. The home that John's parents moved into was Roach Central. While John was there, he occasionally discovered him unconscious in the restroom, including once in his own vomit. Even his mom's second spouse was a drag. Music was out of the question after 6 o'clock in the evening. According to Frank, a strict PG&E supervisor, John used to retreat to his room and play video games by himself for hours on end, never noticing the passing of time. On sometimes, he would unknowingly pee himself. The protracted jam session that gave rise to Porterville was one of those. John attempted to flee to San Francisco with the 37 he had saved up when he was 16 years old. At the bus terminal, his mother publicly smacked him after discovering him. Things began to pick up speed once more in 1959. John, Stu, and Doug were the members of the band. They took their moniker from a doo-wop song and became known as the Blue Velvets. They played 5 evenings a week with all their heart, despite the freezing garage and cheap gear. At a school talent event, they had their breakout moment when John's voice cracked during Summertime Blues, but the audience went wild for their rendition of Rumble. One of the parents was a radio host. A DJ by the name of Casey Kasem played their second hit, Bonita, a few weeks down the road. Tens of thousands of people heard that one play. Bonita only managed to sell 471 copies despite subsequent gigs. After that setback, John decided to write his own tunes. Things changed rapidly when Tom officially joined, which was around 1960. He assumed the role of lead singer in 1961, although John had previously composed 7 songs. Tom insisted that Jay sing lead on one of his songs at a rehearsal. John declared his intention to star alone in all future originals and declined tacitly. Their entire professional trajectory was defined by that. Tom remained silent despite his anger. In private, he voiced his displeasure with John's dictatorial complex to Stu. There was constant tension from 1961 until 1964. The group attempted 3 different singles. Nothing caught on. The last straw was when John's amplifier died while he was performing in his backyard. In front of onlookers, he shattered it to bits. It was enough to cover the cost of gas for 2 months. The extent to which John's annoyance may escalate was evident that evening. Fantasy Records followed in 1964. Their attorney was absent when they signed. In the deal, everything was given away. Almost nothing for masters, royalties, and control. 900 year apiece. The label even secretly rebranded them as the Gollywogs, a moniker steeped with racist connotations, without informing the band. Even before they started playing, they would be booed in black clubs. Fogerty despised it, yet he was powerless to change it. Better name ideas were jotted down in his notepad. At the same time, he clamped down harder on the band. No choice except to consult him. He would often pause the song during rehearsals to fix minor errors. He once had Doug replay a drum fill 7 times. Tom vanished into thin air. Even though they were on the verge of giving up, Stu and Doug remained silent. They used the Gollywogs name to record 7 singles that were non-starters. Compared to other bands, Fantasy's $500 session fee was 6 times lower. Due to the subpar quality of the studio sound, Fogerty discreetly brought tapes home for remixing. Afterwards, in 1966, Doug and John were both drafted. John finally joined the Army Reserve. He was a public information officer by day and a prolific songwriter by night. He had written 40 songs by the time he left. He went so far as to use a hidden cassette recorder to capture his thoughts. John regained complete command upon his return in late 1967. Long sessions were thrust upon him, and he revised arrangements while playing numerous instruments. Again, Tom was sidelined. At least in theory, the songs improved. However, chaos ensued within the band. The release date of Porterville was April 1968. It was popular in the area, but it failed to chart nationally. For their first album, John recorded it a few months down the road. John possessed backups, even though Fantasy attempted to delete the original masters. He wanted to show that they had been onto something from the start. A change in name was necessary by the end of 1967. John selected an item with a decidedly southern tone, reviving Creedence Clearwater. Strong evidence from someone Tom knows. Revival for a new beginning in Clearwater from a beer commercial. Another contract was imposed by Fantasy. Conditions will only get worse over the next 5 years. For the sake of future renegotiation, John signed nonetheless. He could never. The battle that will never really end began with that one signature and cost him millions. Creedence Clearwater Revival's first album was released in July 1968. At first, it didn't generate much of a stir. Their marketing budget was a meager $4,000, and the record barely reached number 52 at its peak. Of all the tracks, one stood out. Fogerty had transformed Dale Hawkins's Susie Q into an eerie, mesmerizing, and raw 8-minute jam. His vocals were recorded in a single 2 a.m. session. Just Take It. The song gradually rose in the charts, eventually reaching number 11 by September, and it was CCR's first gold record. Record company head Saul Zent hardly took note. He was more interested in jazz and only made an appearance once during sessions. but then local DJs began gushing over them as the top unknown band. Traveling around California and the neighboring states in a beat-up van that had about 200,000 miles on it. They had already performed more than 300 performances by the end of 1968. A night at a motel will set you back 6. They were the Sanjos opening act for the Turtles, and Fogerty's unexpected leaps in the middle of his guitar solo were so memorable that the audience continued shouting even after their brief set ended. There was some logic to that brief set. John kept the shows short, even though Doug Clifford wanted them longer. 23 minutes, no interruptions. He thought that staying for too long made the charm vanish. John reportedly told Stu Cook, "Rhythm is the kind of power you don't see." Silently, John's older brother Tom became bitter. Stu had asked for additional bass in the mix, and John had turned it down. John made sure everything was in its place and didn't leave much room for everyone else. After their first single, Porterville, bombed, DJ Tom Donahue picked it up and played it 14 times in 1 week, rebranding it as protest music even though it didn't yet have a name. As a result of all the talk, Woodstock offered him $10,000 for a Saturday afternoon slot in 1969. However, Fogerty declined. Instead, he preferred to retain a $750 performance at the Oakland Coliseum. It was the worst choice he had ever made, he would say later in life. At 3 o'clock in the morning, they took the stage at Woodstock, before an audience that was hardly conscious. I felt like I blew it. Critics went so far as to say that Fogerty's Born on the Bayou was overshadowed by Jimi Hendrix's guitar tone at Woodstock. The roots of Fogerty's worldview were in El Cerdo, California. The monthly rent for the house he grew up in was $85. The experience of seeing his neighbors drafted into the military, while the wealthy evaded service, inspired his music. From such fury, the fortunate son emerged. He was inspired to write it by observing David Eisenhower's decision to marry Nixon's daughter and avoid Vietnam. The studio was awash with Fogerty's intensity. His preference for uncluttered military-style drumming led him to reject 23 of Clifford's drum fill suggestions in a single session. Before Born on the Bayou could pass, Cook had to play the bass line 11 times. It wasn't until after the album was released that Tom realized his rhythm guitar was practically muted on Proud Mary, set to 40% volume. Another painful area was money. Fogerty discovered in August 1968 that the four of them were receiving a paltry 2.5% in royalties. This resulted in less than 1% for each member. With 500,000 copies sold, Susie Q brought in roughly $8,000 for CCR and $190,000 for Fantasy Records. Anger consumed Fogerty. He threatened to produce so many hits that the label would drown in them during a meeting with Zines in January 1969, slamming the contract down on the table. Protracted conflict ensued. After nearly 40 years in 2005, Fogerty finally regained ownership of his publication rights. Within 6 months of its January 1969 release, Bayou Country had achieved triple platinum status. While seated at a piano in El Cerrito during a thunderstorm in November 1968, Fogerty composed Proud Mary. He had never set foot in Mississippi, despite all the hoopla about the river. He drew inspiration for the illustrations from works by Mark Twain and vintage blues albums. It only took 4 hours to compose the song and 3 hours to record it. A second attempt was all it took for Clifford to master the iconic drum intro. By March, the song had sold 1 million copies, and Zines retained $1 million in royalties on Tina Turner's cover, which she kept until 1988. In the same year, CCR released 3 studio albums. January brought Bayou Country, August brought Green River, and November brought Willie and the Poor Boys. The pressure increased with each record. Until the Beatles' Abbey Road came out, Green River was the most played song in the country. At number 3, Willie reached his peak. One of their most famous songs, Fortunate Son, was composed in a mere 20 minutes. The song reflected Fogerty's smoldering rage at the class difference. After its April release, Bad Moon Rising spent 3 weeks atop the UK charts and reached number 2 in the US. The tune was upbeat, but the lyrics were somber, something Fogerty didn't pick up on until he heard the band perform it live. The new guitar he was playing had a tremendous effect on his sound, and his beloved guitar had been stolen. April 1970 saw the band's European tour, which included a sold-out performance at London's Royal Albert Hall. While Fogerty let loose on catchy tunes like Born on the Bayou and Susie Q, tensions were rising behind the scenes. The band began to view him more as a boss than a bandmate after he denied their appearance in the Woodstock film. All power was in Fogerty's hands. All 3 albums from 1969 were written, composed, and produced by him. The band members felt more like extras on Willie and the Poor Boys which he composed nearly entirely on his own. According to Clifford, the studio became into a battleground rather than a place for creativity. Being a part of something so massive while having such little control over it was discouraging, according to Cook. Not only did September's Down on the Corner reach number 3, but so did Fortunate Son. Similar to CCR's humble origins, the idea of a street band performing on a corner reflected their own. However, the financial issues persisted despite the achievement. In 1980, Fogerty voluntarily relinquished his royalties in order to terminate his contract. For 25 years, he received no compensation. The publishing rights to his songs were repurchased by him in 2023. 5 of their singles had reached the top 10 at the year's end in 1969. During their commercial heyday, they performed at Woodstock and made an appearance on Ed Sullivan. However, Fogerty's stint in the Army Reserves lingered in his mind. His inspiration for the effigy came from witnessing Nixon's handling of the anti-war demonstrators on the White House lawn. As exhaustion set in, Cook subtly began to wonder if they could sustain this level of performance for much longer. For 9 weeks after its July 1970 release, Cosmo's Factory ruled the charts. More than 4 million copies were sold. Traveling Band, the main single, peaked at number 2. But it was Little Richard who sued, claiming plagiarism. It took a toll, but it was settled privately. The inspiration for Who Will Stop the Rain came from the Woodstock downpour, and Fogerty used throat lozenges in between takes to record it with a strained voice. He never again sung on high notes because of the harm he did to his voice. Their longest tune, a version of Grapevine, clocks in at over 11 minutes. While they were recording, Tom requested to sing a breakdown solo. John declined. For 3 days, Tom was absent from the studio. They had an explosive altercation behind the scenes at a concert at the Oakland Coliseum, escalating the hostility between them. Tom departed from the band in October 1970, although he remained for a few of farewell performances. December saw the release of Pendulum. A more trippy, solitary sound emerged. On most overdubs, Fogerty worked alone. Once, Cook requested a bass, independently, and even penned the lyrics. Unbeknownst to him, Fogerty deleted it. Cook was enraged when he learned about it. At that same second, it became crystal clear that John was in charge. Although they had disbanded, they remained a band in name only. Even though CCR had sold over 10 million records by 1971, their annual salaries were a meager $100, and with 25 million, Fantasy Records was a success. Once Fogerty seen the documents, he retained legal counsel who asserted that they were due $8 million. Zantz was unmoved. Neither Clifford nor Cook supported John. Legal fees might put them out of business, they were afraid. Instead of continuing to feed a system that devoured them, John chose to end the band because he felt entirely alone. In 1970, they returned to Royal Albert Hall. Despite the audience's incessant clamoring for 17 minutes in a row, John declined to come back for an encore. Afterwards, Cook mentioned that they had other songs prepared, but John dismissed it as encores fake and left. Due to the no encore restriction, promoters all over Europe were irritated and ended up losing both money and goodwill. Touring in 1971 was no picnic. Completed 112 shows in 8 months. Because of his worry, Tom dropped 23 pounds and ended up in the hospital. Overdubs on tape were necessary for John to cover his sections. John penned Sweet Hitchhiker in a hotel room in Detroit in less than an hour during this whirlwind. It was their last top 10 hit, and it peaked at number 6. In Honolulu, they performed their final act together. Tom was hardly audible. A photographer caught him in the act of sobbing backstage. The public was never shown that photo. Something inside John Fogerty cracked in early 1972. He harbored resentment toward the rhythm section because they demanded a larger voice in artistic decisions, and he was still resentful that his brother Tom had left the band. He then revealed something shocking. He threatened to quit unless they contributed songwriting and vocals to the following record in equal measure, addressing Cook and Clifford. All I could feel was deceit masquerading as democracy. After the fact, Clifford claimed it was his punishment for supporting Tom. In Fogerty's version of events, they forced him to relinquish control, not the other way around. The band's situation was precarious in any case. In 1971, Tom had passed away. Fogerty spotted an opportunity when Fantasy Records insisted on fresh music. Release a record that bombs, then disappear while he pretends it wasn't true. The band Creedence Clearwater Revival started working on their last album in January 1972. Worst-case scenario right from the get. In his door-to-door salesmanship, Stu Cook sold vacuum cleaners. A garage band demo sounded like Doug Clifford's 45 RPM. These were no mere mediocre tunes. They were almost done. Fogerty, who used to be in charge of everything, vocals, guitars, and production, now just doesn't care anymore. He uttered not a single note, played not a single chord, and not even touched the volume controls. He only let the film to run. It seemed as if the tires were being fingered as the cause of an automobile careening off a cliff. In hindsight, those closest to him testified that he was fully competent. He allegedly confided in acquaintances behind his back that his bandmates would never come up with creative song ideas. And it was his precise expectation all along. Songs without Fogerty's assistance sounded unpolished and incomplete, standing in stark contrast to the few tunes on which he did have a hand. What a stark contrast. The band CCR couldn't have survived without his guitar. Everything collapsed in its absence. Rolling Stone wasted no time getting all the praise for the record out there. In the first paragraph of his review, John Landau referred to it as Fogerty's Revenge. Next, he proclaimed it to be the most subpar album ever released by a prominent rock group. Because of that quote, it went on. For decades, it trailed behind CCR. It was panned by critics. Sales were significantly lower than their previous 6 gold albums, despite the record reaching number 12 on the charts because to lingering goodwill. Nobody paid attention, not even the radio stations. Although Fogerty contributed songs, like Someday Never Comes, which were good, they were overshadowed by the chaos. Claiming it was embarrassing, incomplete, and incoherent, the press turned on them. It was too late. The damage to the band's reputation was too great for them to overcome. On May 27, 1972, we arrived in Denver. Little did anyone know that it would be their final live performance. Fans continued to shout for previous songs during the encore. The new material was universally disliked, particularly the songs that Cook and Clifford were coerced into singing. At last, Fogerty had had enough. He then got up from the stage, dropped his guitar, and left. There it is. No farewell, no advance notice. On October 16th, a few months down the road, Fantasy Records made the announcement that CCR was finished. Neither Cook nor Clifford were even informed personally. The rest of the group also learned the truth. Anxieties had been rampant during the tour. Cold silences behind the scenes, 20 cities in 2 months of unrehearsed music. It was clear that Fogerty had already decided not to return. Following the split, Fogerty remained silent. Not only that, but musically as well. He made a 10-year public vow not to perform any CCR songs. Fantasy recordings were his #1 enemy. The memories annoyed him. Not even at family gatherings would he play Bad Moon Rising or Proud Mary. He lost millions due to his silence. Ultimately, Bob Dylan was forced to intervene. He confronted Fogerty in 1987, claiming, "If you don't play Proud Mary, people will think it belongs to Tina Turner." Fogerty eventually agreed. Time wasted hurt, though. It infuriated Cook. The band members of CCR received minimal compensation, even while Fantasy continued to profit from their work. They were bound into a harsh arrangement by their 1968 pact. No rights and 180 original tunes. In hindsight, Cook deemed it the most disastrous deal ever inked by a prominent American group. Silence crippled Fogerty's career and harmed fans alike. What was more worse was Fogerty's tendency to shift blame onto others. Despite contributing just 4 songs, 3 originals, and a cover to Mardi Gras, he openly criticized the remainder of the album. He told Rolling Stone that he didn't even consider it a legitimate CCR album. He thought the other songs weren't very good. It was a harsh rebuke. Neither Cook nor Clifford had ever aspired to be musicians. They merely desired a greater degree of control over the band's trajectory. However, after setting them up and seeing them fail, Fogerty claimed it proved they weren't worthy. A lot of emotion and refinement went into his own tracks. Theirs seemed like unfinished drawings. A harsh experiment in search of proof, that's what it was. The inclusion of Creedence Clearwater Revival's name on the cover was the sole reason the record got gold. Fogerty ensured that the identity of the band's bearers would never be forgotten. Fogerty attempted an unusual thing in 1973. With the band the Blue Ridge Rangers, he recorded an album on which he played every instrument: vocals, guitar, drums, and bass. He did everything. He went unnoticed by everyone. Under the influence of anger and black coffee, he managed to record it in only 6 days. Even the LP cover art couldn't get his signature. Despite a smash at number 16, the subsequent single was a complete bust. Because Fantasy Records was worried that the marketing would cut into their earnings from CCR's library, they sabotaged it. To make matters worse, they revealed Fogerty's identity to end the suspense. Even before it started, his single attempt was over. When he returned 2 years later, he had recorded an album named Self-Titled in his home in Berkeley. Rocking All Over the World was its standout single, and it became viral after Status Quo performed it at Live Aid to an audience of around 2 billion people. It didn't matter to Fogerty, though. His next record was categorically turned down by his label, who deemed it unmarketable trash. Some of his most avant-garde compositions and a 12-minute hallucinogenic track were on that album, Hoodoo. For good, it was put on hold. He received $1 million from Asylum simply for ceasing. Years later, he penned 0 words. There was no music from him. He couldn't move. The most bizarre lawsuit in rock and roll's annals followed. Fogerty was sued by Fantasy in 1984 for plagiarism. Despite Fogerty penning both songs, they insisted that The Old Man Down the Road sounded too similar to Run Through the Jungle. He took a guitar into court and performed both songs live to demonstrate their dissimilarity. According to the judge, it was completely new. Though he won, the cost of representation nearly bankrupted him. Even more outrageously, Fantasy's legal team had attempted to assert ownership of his guitar style. Fogerty was despondent and unable to think creatively as a result of the stress caused by the case, which altered copyright law irrevocably. Centerfield, released in 1985, was his comeback album. It was a smashing success, selling millions of copies, but it was forceful. Zan's Cunt Dans and Mr. Greed were 2 songs that took aim at Saul Zaentz, the boss of Fantasy Records. Those lyrics were harsh. In a $140 million lawsuit, Zaentz sought redress. The name change to Zan's Cunt Dans was imposed on Fogerty. The recordings were hesitantly played by radio stations. The title track became a baseball anthem played at every major league park, despite his efforts to avoid royalties by listing phony names on the credits. With only that one song, he made more than $3 million. But the lawsuits continued to pile up. He was even in hot water with the law for the record cover photo, which was taken at Oakland Coliseum. During the years 1976-1984, Fogerty hardly released any music. In Scottsdale, he lived alone, spinning, drinking heavily, and watching TV. While giving an interview, he shattered a guitar in the middle of his 45-minute tirade about his previous contract. That was his state of mind. Creedence Clearwater Revisited, which Cook and Clifford established in 1995, performed the band's classic songs on tour without him. Fogerty won $16 million in his lawsuit. They admitted in court that they hadn't had any communication since 1972. His children had no idea he was the songwriter of some of CCR's most popular songs because he had remained so silent. In 1978, he parted ways with his guitars and recording equipment. He had no interest in music. Afterwards, Tom passed away. Tom Fogerty passed away from complications associated to AIDS on September 6, 1990. A contaminated blood transfusion following back surgery was the source of the illness. He and John hadn't communicated in 20 years. Tom made an effort. He sent correspondence, Christmas cards, and presents. John gave them back to everyone. My Brother's Keeper was a song on Tom's last album. Until after the funeral, John paid no attention to the melancholy request. He was late in getting to Tom's side. Tom passed just hours before the plane touched down. He was overcome with guilt. Zaentz took not only his music but also his brother, he admitted later. On their own, the medical expenses exceeded $2 million. Without informing anyone, John discreetly paid them off. Tom was one of more than 36,000 Americans killed that year. He was just 89 pounds when he passed away. Stu Cook did not discuss the failure until 2025 when he was 80 years old. He claimed that after 1970, everything was ruined by Fogerty's ego. After Cook added bass sections or arrangements to a tune, he still insisted on having full credit. When he wanted others to sign non-disclosure agreements, he would use his creative process as an example. To further ensure their absence from the studio, Fogerty even engaged bodyguards. According to Fogerty, they lied when they testified against Fantasy in court, so he had them administered polygraphs. Even though he understands there can be no reconciliation, Cook claims he loves John like a brother. Their distance is about half an hour. Decades have passed since they last had any kind of communication. The killing blow came in Fogerty's 2025 interview with People magazine. Although he showed forgiveness to his brother Tom, he made it plain that he had not yet forgiven Cook and Clifford. They prioritized business above family, he added. In his confession, he threw away a letter that Cook's dying mother had written, pleading for peace. He claimed to have preserved 400 pages of diaries documenting each betrayal. He was advised to release it by his therapist. Not at all. He indicated that he could be willing to forgive them in the future if they were to publicly recognize their mistake and apologize. We all knew that was never going to happen. Fogerty and Cook continue to perform the same songs in different cities in 2025, but they never meet. Nightly earnings for Fogerty's tour exceed $2,000 million. About the $75,000 is Cook's annual salary. They can't play in the same city again for 30 days according to their contracts. On occasion, Cook attends Fogerty performances, where she sits discreetly in the rear, anticipating an unrequited nod or glance. The music and the quiet unite these two elderly guys, who will never be apart from one another.